Good afternoon, America, and welcome to my channel, Speak Truth to Lies. My name is Kat. So I just wanted to share this article with you. Anti-racism is becoming troublingly racist. You might think it's helping, but it's not. Written by a Steve QJ. So you're not supposed to talk about how frustrating it is to watch children screw things up. You're supposed to be patient when it takes them 17 minutes to tie their shoelaces. You're supposed to applaud their migraine-inducing attempts to play the violin. You're supposed to give your undivided attention as they tell stories that somehow lack a beginning, middle, and end. But worst of all is when a child wants to help you with something. You know that accepting their help will quadruple the time, energy, and resources required to get anything done. You realize that it'd be far simpler to do the job yourself. You're aware that they'll get bored halfway through and give up, but what are you supposed to tell them? They're so enthusiastic, so earnest, so eager to contribute. So you take a deep breath, grit your teeth, and smile, and watch them make a mess. Oh Lord, haven't we all been there? If you've been watching the trajectory of anti-racism over the past few years, you can probably relate. It's become an exercise in patiently explaining things which should be painfully obvious. It's become an endless parade of clickbait headlines and performative outrage. It's become dominated by people who seem as if they want to help, but are hopelessly confused about how to do so. Take, for example, Brentwood School's recently announced plans to segregate parent-teacher meetings by race as a part of their, and I'm not kidding here, Inclusive Excellence Racial Equity Initiative. Remember in my previous video, I told you about the definitions of these words and how the definitions as we see them are completely different than how they actually mean them. White parents will meet with white teachers, Black parents will meet with Black teachers, Hispanic parents with Hispanic teachers. I presume that interracial families will need to separate in the name of progress. So this is where things get weird, because what if your student, your child, has different teachers of different ethnic backgrounds? So this is saying that you can only hear from the teachers that match the ethnic background that you are from. Are you getting a complete picture of your child's progress? Remember, this is all under the guise of inclusive excellence and racial equity. If a child had an idea this asinine, it would be easier to cope. You could explain in clear, age-appropriate language why racial segregation is not the best path to inclusive excellence. You could point out that while some parents may have issues directly related to their race, preventing other parents and teachers from hearing them is likely to make those problems worse. You could remind them in your gentlest, most tender-hearted voice that classifying people by race promotes racism rather than, what was it again? Oh yes, inclusive excellence and racial equity. So my three bad words of 2020 were diversity, inclusion, and equity. These three words and their definitions themselves are not bad, but how the far left, the progressives, view these words is completely different. They're not using the same language we are. Or there's Meyerholtz Elementary, where 8-year-old children, and I actually did a video on this. It was one of my first videos in my series. 8-year-old children are instructed to rank themselves according to power and privilege of their race, their gender, and sexuality. It's how you might reimagine Jane Elliott's famous brown eyes, blue eyes experiment if you utterly failed to understand it. These children aren't learning to look beyond their superficial differences. They aren't being taught the importance of treating others with compassion. They are learning at 8 years old that the most fundamental aspects of who they are will forever mark them as oppressor or oppressed. Remember, if you're white, you're an oppressor. If you are of any other ethnic background, you are oppressed. They're learning to think of each other as a collection of labels instead of complex human beings. They'll likely carry the hangover of this education for the rest of their lives. And that's exactly why we have to fight against it. Then we have people who treat racism as if it's a treasure hunt. Robin DiAngelo is not did racism occur? It's how did racism occur? They scurry around in search of increasingly abstract, petty, blink and you'll miss it forms of racism to submit for our approval. Gardening, rocks, Mozart, knitting, the countryside cycling, floristry, fast food, but also veganism. All of these and more have been called out in the name of anti-racism. Even worse, respected news organizations uncritically publish this nonsense so that everybody can see how woke they are. If I were a more cynical person, I might suspect that these people aren't trying to fight racism at all. I might ask whether headlines like "Can dogs be racist" are designed to do anything more than attract clicks and advertising dollars. I might even suggest that the people who write this garbage are motivated by nothing more than greed and the desire to collect virtue signaling brownie points on Twitter. And while I'd like to give them a pat on the head they're so desperately seeking, it's hard to ignore the fact that every column inch wasted on articles about whether the Smurfs was racist could have been used to write about real issues. After all, the fact that Black male offenders still receive prison sentences, which are on average 20% longer than white offenders for the same crime, or that Black families are only half as likely to own their own homes as white families, or that there are still serious disparities in treatment and outcomes of minority students, all feel a little bit more pressing. So in terms of this one right here, that Black male offenders will still receive prison sentences on average 20% longer, Joe Biden's crime bill, that right there is responsible for that one. Last, but by no means least infuriating, are the saviors. People who are so excited to show off what they've learned during their mandatory diversity training that they haven't noticed or simply don't care how racist they're being. These are the people who target Black police officers at protests. And I know you all seen them last year during the Black Lives Matter movements, these left-leaning white liberals getting up in the faces of Black police officers and screaming at them all kinds of racial obscenities, thinking that they're doing good when in fact they look racist as can't say that word. Or turn up at Black Lives Matter rallies with whip marks painted on their bodies without the tiniest glimmer of self-awareness. The same people who explain that people of color need special treatment if we turn up late for appointments because it's culturally insensitive to expect us to demonstrate time management skills. The same people who have taken terms like white supremacy and diluted their meaning to the point that we're losing the ability to differentiate between benign ignorance and true hatred. And you're seeing this right now with the government is white supremacists, Trump supporters are white supremacists. I supported Trump last election. Is that how you would label me? Watching these allies blunder their way around the anti-racism landscape feels like watching a toddler trying to perform open heart surgery. The stakes are too high. The mistakes are too costly. The constant distractions make it too difficult to focus on the issues that matter. And while I want to believe that their hearts, if not their brains, are in the right place, it's time to be blunt. So I'm going to be blunt here. I have a lot of friends, a lot of white friends who are buying into this concept of white privilege. I reject the idea that I have privilege because I'm white, and I will tell you why. Dear white friends who are claiming this label, I want only to say to you this: If you are claiming that you have privilege based off of an immutable characteristic that you have no control over, basically what you are saying, and literally KKK members could write this, you are basically telling the Black community, yes, I am better than you because I am white. Let me say that again. For those of you who are buying into this concept of white privilege, based off of an immutable characteristic that you have no control over, you are basically telling the Black community that you are better than them because of your white skin. And this is why I will vehemently, every single time, reject the concept that I have privilege because I'm white. So on behalf of everybody who has a stake in this fight, this help is not helping. You are pushing regressive policies and calling them progress. You're squandering opportunities to say something meaningful by writing garbage clickbait. You're framing the fight for equality as a battle between whiteness and Blackness, when if you were a little wiser, you'd know that it's always required people of all colors. Look, I promise as soon as we finish making the world a safer and fairer place for people of color, we'll move straight on to pressing issues like why so many robots are white. We'll conduct a thorough investigation into the racist history of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. We'll answer all of your questions about why racial segregation is not a marker of progress. But until then, why don't you go and play with your toys or something? The grown-ups have important work to do. And we do. There are many different ways to address the disparities that are going on in this country, rather than labeling everything racist and blaming everything on white supremacy or labeling this country as racist. And we need to be able to have real and honest conversations about how to do this. But critical race theory, these so-called white allies, remember, Malcolm X said, beware of the white liberal. You can't trust them. That's what these people are. They think they're doing good. They're really not helping. They're actually hurting any progress that we as a nation can make to actually address these issues. And by doing things like removing grades and not expecting Black children to live up to certain expectations in a school curriculum isn't helping them. Maybe try a mentoring program or some tutoring to get these children up to par. Reading programs to help them catch up. Eliminating grades and expectations are not the way to go about this. It's only going to make the disparities worse. Critical race theory is not going to help these children. Labeling white children as oppressors and ethnic children as oppressed isn't going to help them. Being a victim is not helpful for anybody. Labeling them as victims is not going to help them. The only thing it's going to do is give them a mentality to where, as they progress through life, they are going to continue to blame everyone else for their problems except for where the blame lies. And I know what I'm talking about. It's literally the addict mentality. When you are in the grips of addiction, you make yourself to be a victim. You blame everyone else, your mother, your father, your upbringing, your partner, your friend, everyone else. You blame everybody for your problems except for where the problem really lies. And that's with you and with your thought processes. And we are doing our children a huge disservice by injecting critical race theory into education and teaching them this. We are teaching children how to be oppressors. So they're going to grow up with a stigma. And then ethnic children, you're oppressed. So we're feeding them the victimhood mentality that no matter what you do, you will always be oppressed. And I know too many people in my life of the ethnic persuasion that are the exact opposite of that. So just wanted to share that. More people are waking up. So this is good news. People are starting to see this. Hopefully you will too. Hopefully some of my videos will help you see this and open your eyes and know what to look for. Because I realize some of us are not paying attention. I realize that some of us have lives to lead. And you're not really grasping the full concept of this, but this is the reality that we're living in right now. This is what the left is pushing. And unless we learn how to guard our hearts and our minds and be able to see it and call it out when we see it, our children are going to pay the price for this, and our grandchildren. Until next time, my friends, remember, hypocrisy is everywhere. Speak truth to lies.